to formally open today's session with Victoria Derry. Victoria has been working at the Great Lakes Forestry Center on Hemlock woolly adelgid research for the past 5 years. She's led and contributed to our current knowledge in hemlock woolly adelgid detection methodologies in Ontario, as well as co-creating the hemlock woolly adelgid monitoring network and the hemlock woolly adelgid management guide. Over the next few years, Victoria hopes to continue research on hemlock woolly adelgid monitoring methods and phytosanitary requirements for working and harvesting efforts in infested stands. So take it away, Victoria.
Thank you. Hopefully bring this up properly the first time. Okay, everybody can see that? Great.
Yeah.
Lovely. So good morning. I am Victoria Derry. I work for the Canadian Forest Service at the Great Lakes Forestry Center in Sault Ste. Marie. And this morning, I'm going to go over the guide for managing hemlock woolly adelgid. This was co-created with the Invasive Species Center and was published in 2024. So I'm going to go through it as it stands currently, and that'll give you a good background on hemlock woolly adelgid and some options out there in prevention and control, and more information that you can get and partners and resources and whatnot as well. However, it is currently undergoing an overhaul. So we are doing some major edits this year, and I will go through that at the very end. So why did we make this guide? Back in 2021, we had a discussion with land managers and foresters across the province, and there was a couple of asks that came out of that. One thing was that it seemed like everything could kind of split into two groups. So we had people who were managing large areas of forest, sort of in that central Ontario and northward. And then we had people who were managing sort of smaller stands and forests. And that seemed to be more like municipalities and conservation authorities, landowners, consulting companies that manage forests for landowners, that sort of level of groups. And they were asking for two sort of separate things. The groups kind of more towards the north were looking for something that could accompany the provincial silviculture guide. And from that, we wrote an article that was published in the Forestry Chronicle, and then an accompanying tech note that sort of was to go along with the silviculture guide. But everybody in sort of the southern part of the province was really interested in more broad scale management guide, something that they could take to their managers and say, like, this is sort of where we have a stamp of approval of these are the options. This is kind of what we're going to build as our own management plan for this property. So that's where this came from. Inside this guide, you can see the cover there on the left. We go into the background of the pest, some biosecurity, including the CFIA phytosanitary requirements for movement of infested wood. We go into some options for you for prevention, your options for control as they currently stand, into your resources and partnerships. We have a few appendices that have some extra information for you to reference. And then I am going to go over these next steps that we're going to be taking on our next update. Okay, so this is a good graphic that we've been using for a few years that kind of just shows how the invasion has spread in the province of Ontario. Hold on a second, I gotta minimize this so I can see properly. So the first two detections back in 2012 and 2014 were eradicated, and then we didn't find any HWA again in Ontario until 2019 in Niagara Falls and Wainfleet. Since then, it's been almost annually that we have been finding at least one new site with HWA in it again. And that has led to some changes in regulations in the province as well. The newest sites are from last year were Rouge National Park and Norfolk County. There was some sites in there. And I think there have been more sites found since that are within the regulated areas as well. So this map shows our introduction and spread. So it was first detected in Richmond, Virginia in 1951. This map, you'll see the gray is all of the host range for HWA. So that is your Eastern Hemlock and Carolinian Hemlock. And then if you look through the dark blue, that's when it first sort of started spreading from 1951 to 85. And then as you work up into the lighter colors, 2011 to 2020, that's your sort of darker yellow. And then we have this really light creamy yellow that is in Ontario. This isn't completely up to date. This is just as it stands in our current document. So that is something that will be updated. In the zoomed in picture of Ontario here, since that's where we are, you can see there's like many sites through the Niagara Peninsula. The regulated area has grown there, and it is currently as far west as the area around Long Point, and then the known eastern extent remains to be in the Grafton area, which you can see in the map there. So the life cycle. The life cycle of Hemlock woolly adelgid is a little bit more complicated than some of your pests that you might deal with. It has 2 asexual generations a year, and they are broken into the cystins and progrediens generations. So the cystins generation sort of grows through the winter into adulthood into the spring, and then they lay eggs for the progrediens generation. They grow very, very rapidly through the spring. So we tend to start to see eggs in May, sometimes in April. It really just depends on the winter that we have, how early we get warm in the spring. And we have done some phenology research on that. So we're going to hopefully be able to put in some like key temperatures into the next iteration of the guide. And so it goes through its 4 nymphal stages and becomes an adult. And then those adults lay eggs in the late spring. We start to see crawlers actually in the late spring. And then the crawlers will crawl up and settle at the base of the needles and estivate for a time. And those crawlers are now part of the cystins generation that will grow through the fall, grow through the winter, and the cycle will repeat itself the next year. There is a winged life stage that comes out of this progrediens generation, and it can fly to normally some spruce species in its native range, but we don't have those here, and it's unable to persist. So it doesn't actually contribute to populations. For spread and dispersal, we're only seeing dispersal occur from eggs being moved and crawlers being moved because they're the only mobile life stage. The vectors of spread tend to be birds and other wildlife. Birds are sort of that vector that moves it very far without any sort of human mediation. Wind can move it within the stand quite far. And then obviously we have humans. So our clothing and equipment, nursery stock, movement of infested woody materials, all can contribute to spread. And again, that wing stage will not establish new populations. So this next slide is just a bit of a bonus. These are some photos that I've taken in the lab to really get you to understand how small this insect is. So on the left, you can see I've wet down an ovisac with some ethanol, and then that allows you to see all of the eggs and some of the crawlers that are in there. So those tiny, tiny little balls of wool are absolutely packed with eggs in the spring. On the right-hand side, in a petri dish, is what a crawler would look like to the naked eye if it was just sitting on a piece of paper or whatever. It's super, super tiny. It's just a little fleck of pepper, basically. And then this photo is really good perspective of that's what your ovisacs are looking like on your branch, and this relative size of the twig and the needles and that tiny, tiny little speck in the middle is one crawler. that has crawled out of that ovisac and is going to head up that shoot and settle at the base of another needle. So the biosecurity and CFIA phytosanitary requirements. So CFIA can regulate movement of woody materials in infested sites through two methods, the infested places order and the notice of prohibition of movement. In order for any materials to be removed from any infested sites for research or any other purposes like that, this would also include harvesting of any woody materials in an infested site. You have to receive an approved domestic movement certificate. This is what we use for research. So we have to apply for any time that we do work where we'll remove samples, and we have to apply to each individual site we're working in. And then we must follow the containment procedures for infested materials that they've given us. And then we work in a CFIA improved containment facility that has written authority from CFIA to work on hemlock woolly adelgid. This section also goes through some biosecurity measures to work in infested sites, and we basically outline our process. We go over the high risk time of year, so that's the spring when we can really see movement of those crawlers and eggs. Our process includes working in uninfested sites first with separate equipment, bagging up our outer clothing between sites, cleaning boots with soapy water, drying them and spraying them with diluted Prevail to disinfect and kill anything else that might be on them, cleaning equipment with alcohol wipes. So that includes our hard hats, our pencils, our hand clippers, anything we're using. We use a sticky roller on our clothes and our hair, and then we wash and dry all of our field clothes, vests, gear in between, like as soon as we're done all of our work, and we like to clean our trucks. So it can be very tedious, especially in our case when we tend to work through 12 sites in the span of a week or two. So it's a lot of work making sure we have clean clothes and that we're cleaning everything in between, even between infested sites, because you never know what else you could be spreading. So this is that map that was in the bottom corner of the last slide. This is the current infested places orders. So you can see that it now includes the entire regional municipality of Niagara, the city of Hamilton, Haldimand County, and the township of Alnwick-Haldimand, which is this one up in the Cobourg area. Those red dots are all infested areas that have received notice of prohibition of movement. And so any new sites that would be found outside of those regulated areas would also receive that from CFIA. The next section in the guide is when we get into some prevention. And the first step of that is hemlock health and monitoring. So we want you to look for the warning signs of poor hemlock health and vigor. This could be reduced growth, dead, dying branches, graying or browning of foliage. And then particularly with hemlock woolly adelgid, we tend to see this foliage loss on the branch tips. So you'll have these sort of bare ends on the tips of the branches. Other factors that you should be keeping an eye out with your hemlock health is any persistent drought or flood, other pests and pathogens in the area, storm damage, and then overcrowding of your hemlock. This section we include a survey options table. So I'll go through some of it pretty quickly, but we lay out the method, the equipment required. This is an online document, so we do have hyperlinks in there, so ways that you can get some of the materials you might need, relative costs, the time of year that you can do this method, and some pros and cons. So this can really help you develop your own monitoring plan. Obviously, there's visual surveys. This is going to be your lowest cost. You might want a couple of pieces of equipment to help you with it. It can be done year round, but it is more successful in the spring and early summer when we have those larger woolly masses. You can look at branches on the forest floor. You can look at the trunk of the tree. You can look at any branches that are low enough hanging that you can look at it, but it is fairly unreliable and stands with tall trees, and it can be very difficult to detect early infestations. You can then get into destructive sampling, which is basically your visual surveys, but you are cutting branches from the very top of the tree. The infestations tend to start at the very top of the tree and then work their way down. So you'll want to take samples from as high up as you can and take a look at those branches. It is obviously more labor intensive and you are damaging the tree though. Trapping is a passive method that you can use, especially if you don't have time to be out looking through all of your woodlots. You can use sticky cards, some 3D printed microscope slide traps, and you will need a microscope though to look through to actually see if you see any crawlers or eggs or ovisacs that have fallen. It can be fairly expensive to get all the equipment going, but you do just sort of get to set it and forget it, come back, grab your traps, and then take them back to your office or lab and look through them. Ball sampling is a fairly fun and popular option. It is quite labor intensive. This is shooting racquetballs that have Velcro around them through the trees that can pick up ovisacs, and that can be really helpful for finding low-level infestations. However, our issue with this one right now is that the company that created the slingshots we were using, which was Hyperpet, they were actually a slingshot used to shoot tennis balls for dogs to chase, have been discontinued, and we haven't found a good alternative yet. The last is environmental DNA. So this is using various methods to collect bits of DNA and then obviously go through the PCR process to extract that DNA and see if we can find Hemlock woolly adelgid. It is the most expensive option on here. You have to have somebody who can do that extraction process for you, or you need a lab yourself that can do it. And so it's usually a little bit more difficult for people to use. The next option for prevention is some silviculture. You want to be reducing competition for your hemlock, open the canopy to the minimum recommendation, which is 70% closure. We aren't recommending that you do any preemptive salvage because you could end up removing resistant trees with really good genetics. And obviously, we're going to recommend that you remove your unhealthy and undesirable trees first. So in this section, we also have this chart that is from the Parker Tech Note, the one that I was speaking of earlier. And it breaks down the management objective, strategy, canopy, and understory recommendations by the stage of invasion that you're in. So this is a really good reference depending on whether you are not dealing with Hemlock woolly adelgid yet, you've started to find it, you have a very high infestation, or you're actually starting to see that your hemlock are dying off from it. And then at the very end of this table, this is just continued. We do get into some best management practices. So we want to see you avoiding the harvest of infested hemlock until there's more than 60% needle loss to retain potentially resistant trees. And then you want to minimize the soil disturbance and logging damage to maintain vigor of residual canopy trees and minimize that spread by human activity. The next section of the guide is the control section. The first option here is chemical control. We go through the registered products through PMRA, which is your Imajet and Imajet 10, your triazine, and then your products available through emergency registration with PMRA, which is your Starkville and Zytect. They all have different pros and cons. So the first Imajet, Imajet 10, it's an injected option. It does move slower through the tree. It takes 6 to 9 months before reducing any levels, but it does provide protection for a longer period of time. whereas triazin, which is also injected, moves quite quickly through the tree to knock down the HWA levels and provides protection for approximately 2 years. It's the same sort of thing between Starkle and Zytect, where you get that quick knockdown with the Starkle, and it takes a little bit longer and lasts longer with the Zytect. There are some areas that will allow Starkle and Zytect to be applied in a mixture, but not everywhere. This chart is not actually in the management guide yet. We're hoping to create a version of it for the guide, but this is from the McQuarrie and Saunders article in the OPFA, the Professional Forester, and it's from March 2024. So it kind of goes through the same products and gives you your application method, your registration number with PMRA, and then who you could contact to actually get more information about it. So biocontrol is a really hot topic in Hemlock woolly adelgid. Everybody wants it. Nobody has it. It's kind of how it feels in Canada. They have been doing releases and rearing in the USA for quite a while. So there's two predatory beetles that they work with. One is from British Columbia, where Hemlock woolly adelgid has been for quite a long time and is sort of considered endemic to the area now. And then there's a predatory beetle that's brought in from Japan. They're both Leucobius species. And then there's two predatory silverflies from BC. Those are the Leucotraxis species. They both will feed on Hemlock woolly adelgid eggs. The Leucobius will feed on the eggs in the early spring. The Leucotraxis will feed on eggs in the late spring. And then the adult beetles will feed on nymphs as well. Biocontrol releases and rearing has started in Nova Scotia, but it's very, very early stages. Nothing has started in Ontario yet. There is no current program or research in Ontario. We have a bit more complex process to actually get something like that started here. And then also just keep in mind, because everybody, kind of, like I said, everybody wants this, but the efficacy of like the rearing, the establishment, and whether they actually have any lasting effect on Hemlock woolly adelgid numbers in Eastern North America are still being assessed by US research facilities. Your final option and control that we have in the guide currently is your destruction, removal, and thinning. So it has been shown that increasing light and water for hemlock through crown release can have an effect. Removing and destroying small localized infestations to stop the spread is an option. But again, we do not recommend preemptive salvage. So that would be an option if you have a few trees on your property or a really, really small woodlot that has hemlock in it that are infested. And then we are looking for lingering hemlock and resistant hemlock as this continues to spread through the province. The next section in the guide is the resources and partnership sections. Resources that we include in there currently include educational videos. So we go over how to do ball sampling, how to do sticky trap sampling, the phytosanitary recommendations. There's webinars and workshops that the Invasive Species Center have recorded and kept on their YouTube channel. The Invasive Species Center has also started an invasive forest pest training course, which you can see on the right there. And then we also have some other resources from other jurisdictions. In the partnerships, we go over the Hemlock woolly adelgid Monitoring Network, which is a community science program. And you can see in the photos on the right, all of the supplies that we ship out to anybody who's participating. It's an eDNA trap. You get to set it up under your hemlock. It gets sent back to us. We look it over visually to see if we can see any crawlers. And then it gets sent off to the CFIA lab and they do the extraction and look for any genetic material from HWA. We have found a number of sites through this process already, so it is effective. We've expanded throughout pretty much all of Eastern Canada as well, and have started to find some sites out there. And then There's also non-government groups in there that we discuss: the Invasive Species Center, the Ontario Woodlot Association, Eastern Ontario Model Forest, Forest Ontario, just to name a few, and the Ontario Hemlock Woolly Adelgid Science Working Group. So these have 3 subcommittees, and these are resources. These are ways for people like myself to get an idea of what people are wanting to see done, for us to provide help to groups that are starting to deal with hemlock woolly adelgid and have questions. So these 3 subcommittees are a resource for you as well. There's a monitoring management subcommittee, communications and outreach, and science and research. We currently have 2 appendices in the guide. One is for pesticide information, and the other is for survey methods. The survey methods are resources on how to build a survey protocol that will work for you. So ball sampling and sticky cards is one of them. And then we also include the CFIA visual survey protocol. And these are both there for you to be able to take back and make your own protocol based on what your woodlot looks like. Obviously, we can't say, go and do this exact thing, because some people are working with woodlots that are 4 hectares and others are working in woodlots that are hundreds of hectares. So it's got to be built for your property and your amount of hemlock. The last appendices is all of the pesticide information. So we have links in there that will take you to PMRA information and application information from the companies themselves on how to use all of the pesticides. Okay, and then going into the next steps, also just to point out, this photo is an adult hemlock woolly adelgid through the microscope. So they start to look quite different as they get bigger. The updates for this year. We're going to be doing some regular updates to the existing sections. So that's obviously any changes in the range in Ontario, new regulated areas, life cycle and temperatures, and those effects for Ontario and Nova Scotia, the chemical control updates. A new section we'll be adding this year are case studies. So where I'm going to include a case study on a monitoring program that is actively occurring in the province, pre-infestation silviculture and treatment, post-infestation silviculture and treatment, which includes harvesting other species in hemlock woolly adelgid infested woodlots. These are things that have started to happen since we created this guide, and I was really hoping that people would allow us to use this information. I'm hoping to also put in some stand and tree prioritization recommendations for your pre and post-invasion woodlots, horticulture and nursery information. We're going to make a 1-pager for landowners, so something you could pull out, give to a landowner with lots of information on them. Regional resources and programs will be updated appendices. So we'll hopefully maybe be able to put some new survey protocols in there, make sure that insecticide information is up to date. And then the new piece there is a visual guide for monitoring hemlock. So I'm hoping to make a pretty big, basically photo guide with signs you should look for in your hemlock and lots of images of hemlock woolly adelgid and ovisacs that will help you when you're doing your surveys. So how can you help us keep the guide evergreen? Because it is something we are aiming to keep as up to date as possible, constantly growing with the research we have, constantly growing with the spread of the pest and what other groups are doing and what you want to see in it. This is ultimately for you to use. And if we're not answering your questions, then it's not very helpful, is it? So please notify us of any errors or discrepancies you find. If you have an idea of a new section that would be useful, you can let us know. If you want to provide a case study for us to feature, contact us. I've reached out to the first 3 that we're putting in there, but if you have something really cool that you're doing that you think would be a good piece of the puzzle, you can let us know. I've put the information at the bottom there for the Invasive Species Center. And if you have any specific ideas or questions for me, My email is also there, victoria.derry@nrcan-rncan.gc.ca. It's a mouthful. It's also hard to type in, so make sure you have all those letters in the right spot. And that's it for me. I think I actually was a little early, so I do have time for some questions.